The sun was just beginning to set when Daniel and I pulled up to the house where I'd spent most of my childhood summers. It looked the same, at least on the outside painted shutters, a wide porch, the scent of lilacs from the hedge line. But as soon as I stepped out of the car, something felt stale, like a memory trying too hard to stay alive. My mother, Caroline, was already flitting through the yard, hugging guests with theatrical flair, lipstick freshly reapplied. Paper lanterns bobbed from trees. Polite jazz floated from a Bluetooth speaker near the grill. The scene tried to be festive, but there was a forced quality to it, like everyone had been told to smile at gunpoint. I adjusted the strap on my shoulder bag and reached for Daniel's hand. He gave it a light squeeze, his eyes scanning the crowd with the quiet wariness I'd come to know well. He never said much at these things. He didn't have to. Caroline spotted us. "Emily, darling," she sang, arms already outstretched. Her perfume hit me before she did. I braced for impact. "Simple," she replied, her tone just sugary enough to confuse outsiders. Daniel nodded politely. "Caroline, come, let me show you where everything is. Monica's around here somewhere, probably helping with the drinks." Monica, of course, my sister, the eternal golden child, couldn't just attend, she had to co-host. I didn't see her immediately, but I could already hear her voice somewhere near the drink station, laughing too loudly at someone's story. Daniel and I found a spot near the snack table. I busied myself with grape skewers I didn't want, while he accepted a glass of white wine from a teenager who looked overwhelmed by the tray he was carrying. "You okay?" I asked Daniel. "Fine," he replied, scanning the crowd again. "Just smile through it," I whispered, poking his arm. 2 hours tops, then we escape." He didn't answer. His expression stayed locked in that careful, neutral look he wore in meetings with people he didn't trust. An announcement crackled from a speaker. "Everyone, please gather around. We're bringing him out now." There was a sudden hush, broken only by the clinking of glasses and the rustling of paper plates, as people turned their chairs toward the porch. A moment later, 2 men wheeled out Grandpa Harold. He wore a burgundy sweater vest and brown slacks. His hair was neatly combed. He looked polished, composed, almost staged. I waved instinctively. No response. He didn't blink. His eyes were distant, unfocused, like he was watching something behind us no one else could see. I stepped forward slightly. Caroline appeared at my side instantly, blocking me like a security guard. "He's not talking much these days," she said, voice low. "Right?" I said, nodding though I felt a strange tug in my chest. She raised her glass. "A toast," she said, her voice wobbling just enough to make the moment about her. "To 90 years of wisdom, love, and generosity. To the man who built this family with his bare hands, we are here because of you." Murmurs of agreement rose around us. A few people sniffled. I noticed one woman wiping her eye with a napkin. I turned to Daniel. He wasn't clapping. "Hey," I said, nudging him. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer. "Daniel," he leaned in close to my ear. "Get your purse," he said quietly. "We're leaving. Act like nothing's wrong." I pulled back, laughing. What? His face didn't move. "Get your purse. Walk inside. Pack now. You're not serious." He turned his head slowly, finally looking me in the eyes. "Something is very, very wrong." The words dropped like a stone in my stomach. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Calm, measured. "Absolute. Daniel, we just got here. This is my grandfather's party." "I know," he replied. "But that's not your grandfather." I stared at him, the background noise of the party dulling around me. "Are you saying he's a fake?" "Just get your bag," he repeated. Panic fluttered at the base of my spine. I glanced toward the porch again. Daniel had already started walking toward the house. I hesitated only a second before following. Inside, everything felt colder. I rushed upstairs to the guest room, hands trembling as I yanked open my overnight bag. Voices floated in from outside, laughing, toasting. Music. I zipped the bag, threw it over my shoulder, and met Daniel at the front door. We walked to the car in silence. No one stopped us. No one even looked our way. Daniel opened the passenger door for me and got in on the other side. He locked the doors with a firm click. Then, gripping the wheel tightly, he said it again. "That man is not Harold Whitaker." And for the first time since I arrived, I believed him. But if that wasn't my grandfather, then where was he? And who had taken his place? The air inside the car felt dense, like we had sealed ourselves inside a vacuum of truth. I was still holding my overnight bag like a shield. My seatbelt dangled unused at my side, my brain refusing to move past the words he had just spoken. That man is not Harold Whitaker. I stared at him, trying to process. "Daniel, are you hearing yourself? That's a serious thing to say." He turned toward me slowly. "I know," I said. "You've told me that." He nodded, calm but resolute. "I remember the train station in Marseille. I remember the passport clerk in Boston who blinked 6 times in a row while printing our documents. I remember your grandfather. I met him twice, once at your graduation and once at your dad's retirement party. I remember his face." "People age," I whispered. "Ears don't change shape when you age," Daniel said. "And that man's ears are different." The sentence felt absurd and undeniable at the same time. I let my head rest against the window, forehead pressed to the cool glass. Outside, the neighborhood was still and unbothered. Wind moved gently through the trees. The world hadn't shifted, but everything inside me had. "So what? You think someone replaced him?" He didn't answer. "Daniel?" He glanced over, voice low. "Your Uncle Leo." I blinked. "What about him? You said he looked a lot like your grandfather when he was younger." "I had, years ago, at some family barbecue. He always had the same bone structure," I murmured. "But Leo's never around. I haven't seen him in forever." "Exactly." I sat back, replaying the image of the man in the chair. Sweater vest, beard, glasses. Silent. Was it really just age? Or had I accepted it too easily because I wanted to believe I still had a chance to reconnect with him? And why hadn't he spoken? Why was he kept away from me? Always from a distance. Always an excuse. "You noticed his hands?" Daniel asked suddenly. "What?" They were resting on the armrests, perfectly still, like props. I hadn't noticed, not consciously. But now that he said it, I remembered that stiffness and the smile. Daniel added, "It didn't move. Not once." Daniel didn't speak. And neither did I, because deep down I already knew. If they went that far to fake a man's presence at his own birthday, something terrible had to be hiding behind it. I pulled out my phone and opened my photos. I scrolled until I found the last Zoom screenshot with Grandpa 3 years ago. He looked older, yes, but the softness in his eyes was still there. I remembered that call vividly. After that, every time I tried, Mom said he was asleep, or tired, or not feeling up to it. Eventually, she stopped answering. Back then, I chalked it up to distance, 2 time zones, to life being life. But now all those little details rearranged themselves in my mind like puzzle pieces locking into place. "Emily," Daniel said gently, "we need to call someone." "Someone?" My voice cracked. "Who, like the police?" He nodded. My whole body tensed. "And what exactly am I supposed to say?" "Hi, I think someone's impersonating my dead grandfather." "If we're wrong," he said, "we'll deal with that. But if we're right," I trailed off. Daniel didn't fill in the sentence. He didn't need to. My finger hovered over the screen. My breathing felt uneven. I wasn't afraid of the collie, was afraid of what it might confirm. I thought about Caroline's tight little smile when we arrived. about Monica's carefully curated role as co-host, about how no one, not a single person, had let me near him. They had built a wall around him and padded it with paper lanterns and polite music. I dialed a dispatcher, picked up. I kept my voice calm, deliberate. "Hi, I'm calling from 2817 Willow Glen Road. I believe ... someone may be impersonating a relative. I haven't seen my grandfather in 3 years, and I don't believe the man at his birthday party is actually him." She asked me to repeat it. I did. Daniel reached over and placed a hand on mine, steadying it. "We'll send someone out to check," the dispatcher said. When I hung up, I couldn't feel my legs. I just kept asking myself the same question on loop. If that wasn't Grandpa, where was he? And what had they done to keep me from finding out? The police didn't come with sirens. There were no flashing lights, no chaos. Just 2 plainclothes officers stepping out of an unmarked sedan 20 minutes after I ended the call. From the car window, I watched them walk with the kind of quiet confidence you see in men who've been trained to expect lies. Daniel sat still beside me, his hand still resting lightly over mine. Neither had I. They knocked once on the front gate before letting themselves into the yard. The party hadn't changed. Laughter still floated through the air, but now it sounded thinner, like a balloon slowly deflating. People still held glasses, still smiled, but their eyes flicked nervously toward the men in slacks and badges. The officers split. One approached the back patio, where most of the guests were. The other went directly to the man in the wheelchair. My throat closed as I watched. The man didn't move. Not at the sound of footsteps, not at the badge held in front of his face. He just sat there. I felt like I was watching a scene in a movie that I'd already seen before. Like I knew how it would end, but couldn't stop it from unfolding. Caroline appeared quickly. I recognized the fake composure in her walk, the tight smile that used to terrify me as a teenager. She was speaking too fast. Her hands gestured like she was describing a recipe, not defending a lie. Monica was behind her, hovering visibly pale, clutching a wine glass like it was her last line of defense. The man in the wheelchair still said nothing, and then I realized no one was touching him. Not Mom, not Monica, not Dad. Even strangers touch an elderly man on his birthday. A hand on the shoulder, a kiss on the cheek. But this man sat like a museum piece, behind invisible glass. I watched one of the officers kneel, say something, then gesture toward the house. Mom nodded, disappeared inside, and returned with a folder, probably an ID, maybe some medical file. It didn't matter. The other officer was already walking back toward our car. Daniel sat up straighter. I gripped my seatbelt. The officer leaned down to my window. I rolled it down halfway. "Can you stay nearby?" he asked. "We'll contact you soon." I nodded. "Is it him? Is it my grandfather?" He paused. "We're still confirming some things." He just nodded politely and walked away. And suddenly I was 10 years old again, sitting on the porch with Grandpa Harold as he sanded down an old birdhouse, telling me how to spot liars by their hands. "They'll talk smooth," he had said, "but watch the hands. Hands always shake before mouths do." I hadn't thought about that in years. But now, staring at the man in the chair, at my family circling like sharks, I started thinking about everything I'd chosen not to see. The last time I spoke to Grandpa was on Zoom, 3 years ago. He had looked older, sure, but sharp. He made jokes. He told me he was trying to grow tomatoes again, even though the squirrels kept stealing them. He asked how Daniel was doing and if we still danced in the kitchen when we were happy. After that, things changed. I called. Mom said he was tired. Then she stopped answering. At first, I thought I'd done something wrong. Maybe Grandpa was disappointed I moved so far away. Maybe he was upset I missed Thanksgiving. Or maybe I had just imagined how close we were. Daniel would tell me I was overthinking. "Your mom's always been like that. Don't let her get into your head," he said. Monica got the warm affection, the extra slices of pie, the over-the-top send-offs. When she left for college, there were tears and long letters and weekly calls. When I left, I got a suitcase. No hugs, no promises. Just Dad at the door saying, "Time to grow up." I didn't cry, not then. I didn't want to give them that. I packed my things, took the small scholarship I'd earned, and left. Every month, a small check in the mail, sometimes with nothing more than a post-it note. "Hope this helps. Proud of you." It wasn't much, but it was everything. He never explained it, never asked for anything back. He just ... gave. Steady, reliable, silent support. And now, if what Daniel believed was true of that man wasn't Harold Whitaker, then they hadn't just hidden him from me. They had erased him. I took out my phone again and opened my text messages. I scrolled back to the last conversation I'd had with Mom. It was over a year ago. She sent me a picture of her garden. I replied with a smiley face. That was it. I had accepted the silence because I didn't want to believe it meant anything. Now it was roaring in my ears. In that moment, I didn't just feel like an outsider. I felt like a threat they'd been trying to contain. My hands trembled. Daniel turned to me. "You okay?" I shook my head. "I'm not sure who I'm related to anymore." He didn't reply. Because how do you answer a question like that? And what would we do if the next one was even worse? If that wasn't Grandpa? Where was he? And why had no one told me he was already dead? We drove around for an hour. Neither of us spoke. Daniel just kept driving, eyes fixed on the road, his knuckles still white on the steering wheel. I stared out the window, as if the trees and sidewalks could explain what my family never had the courage to. When we returned to the hotel, my phone rang. Screen lit up. "Mom," Daniel looked at me, but said nothing. I answered. "How could you?" she snapped. No greeting, no pause. Her voice trembled with rage, or maybe fear, or maybe she didn't know the difference anymore. "You called the police on your own family. Do you even realize what you've done?" "Yes," I said, trying to stay calm. "You've always been ungrateful," she growled. "You think you're better than us because you live far away, because you married someone who uses big words." "Where is Grandpa?" I asked, voice low. "Silence, you don't get to ask that," she said finally. "Is he dead?" I already knew, but I needed to hear it. No answer. When? Nothing. "Where's his body?" "You weren't here," she said at last. "You didn't see what it was like to care for him. You don't know." "You didn't let me see," I replied. "You left us," she snapped back. "You walked away. After you pushed me out the door with a suitcase and not a single goodbye." The call disconnected. I didn't know if she hung up or if the world just didn't want to hear anymore. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, eyes fixed on the brown-stained carpet. Daniel stood near the window, watching the street. "Did she confirm it?" he asked. "She did," without saying it. He walked over and sat beside me. The next morning at 7:45 a.m., there was a knock on our hotel room door. 2 officers, one spoke, the other just observed. "We've received a voluntary statement from your mother," said the first. "They're reporting that Mr. Harold Whitaker passed away in March 2022. Natural causes, private burial." I didn't cry. I didn't even move. It was like my body had already known for a long time, just waiting for my heart to accept it. Daniel closed the door behind them. 3 years. 3 years of birthday cards. 3 years of asking for Zoom calls. 3 years wondering if Grandpa was upset with me. Wondering if I'd moved away too soon. Wondering if he was tired, confused, or just sick. No, he was gone, and they never told me. I sank into the hotel chair, head in my hands. "He's gone," I whispered. And they pretended he wasn't. They did more than pretend, and he was right. A few days later, a video began to circulate online. Shaky footage from the party, the fake toast, the man in the wheelchair pretending to listen. my mother wiping away tears that now looked like part of a stage act. The internet exploded. They threw a birthday party for a dead man. Who was the guy in the chair? Is this even legal? The comments came from everywhere. I was labeled everything from a traitor to a hero, from a narcissist to an attention-seeking brat. People saw a 30-second clip and thought they knew the whole story. Then my phone rang again. It was Grandpa's lawyer. "Emily," he said gently. "I've been trying to reach you for a while." "Sorry," I murmured. "Everything's a mess. Your grandfather left the estate to you. The house, the assets, the trust, all in your name." I didn't speak. "This wasn't a secret," he added. "He told your mother and sister years ago." And suddenly it all clicked. They knew. They had always known. They pretended he was alive because, if he wasn't, it would all be mine. And if I didn't know he had passed, they could keep it. The house, the money, the story, and the silence. That was the lock on the vault. They didn't just hide his body. They hid the fact that I still mattered to him. That party. It had never been about celebrating Harold Whittaker. It was a costume, a cover-up, a lie dressed in cake and streamers. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting the lines in the cheap plaster finish, while Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, reading everything he could find about legal impersonation charges. The police hadn't returned yet. Neither had my mother, but the internet had. By morning, the story had spread like wildfire. Family throws fake party to cover up inheritance fraud. Who was the man in the wheelchair? A video clip from the party had gone viral overnight. It showed Carolyn dabbing her eyes with a cocktail napkin, Monica raising a glass, and the imposter, my uncle, leostering blankly ahead like a sleepwalker. The comments were worse than the headlines. I read 20 before I gave up. Apparently, I was everything from a greedy heiress. No one wanted nuance. No one cared about the context. They only saw the spectacle. Daniel tried to take the phone from my hands. "Don't read that. It's poison." "I'm just looking for something true," I whispered. "Anything." He sat next to me and pulled me close. "You already found the truth. That's why they hate you." The knock came just after 9 a.m. A different pair of officers this time. More formal, clipboard in hand. "Miss Carter," one began. "We've initiated a formal investigation into the handling of Mr. Whittaker's death. We'll need to ask you some questions." I nodded and let them in. I told them everything. How I hadn't spoken to Grandpa in 3 years. How every attempt to reach him was blocked. How I was told he was resting or too tired. How the man at the party didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't react. Lots of them asked calm questions in careful tones. When I asked what would happen to my family, the officer responded without emotion, "That will depend on what we find. If death was concealed for financial gain, there are federal implications." "They've admitted to hiding his death," he said plainly. "Caroline, Monica, Leo. Your father hasn't commented, but all 3 have given statements. And what did they say? Emily," he continued gently, "there's something else. Your grandfather's will was revised 2 months before his death. He left a letter for you." I blinked. "A letter? I can email you a scanned copy. The original is in the vault." An hour later, I was holding my phone in both hands, reading shaky cursive writing in ink so faint it looked like memory itself. "My Emily, I wish I had more time. But if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found out the truth. You always saw things clearly, even when they tried to make you feel invisible. I didn't want them to erase you, so I made sure they couldn't. Whatever happens, know this. I was proud of you, always. H. I didn't cry." I read it again, and then again. The front door was unlocked. I didn't bother knocking. No one was home. The silence in the house felt like residue, like something sacred had been scrubbed out and replaced with performance. The living room was clean, staged, curated for the party that had never truly been for him. I stood at the fireplace where his old rocking chair used to be. It was gone. I walked through the kitchen. Every surface was spotless, every drawer perfectly closed. But when I opened the cabinet above the fridge's hiding spot since I was 6, I found a crumpled grocery receipt with a note scribbled on the back in Grandpa's handwriting. "Don't trust them. Make noise if you have to." He must have known. He must have seen it coming. Maybe he even tried to stop it. But he couldn't. And now it was my turn. Back in the hotel that night, I received the final confirmation. The medical examiner had officially ruled the death as natural causes. Grandpa had died in his sleep, quietly, peacefully, alone. The coroner's report didn't change what came next. Criminal charges were filed, failing to report a death, withholding vital information, unlawful use of financial assets, fraudulent impersonation. None of them went to prison. Leo, my uncle, avoided harsher sentencing by cooperating fully. He admitted he was paid to impersonate Grandpa, that he felt uncomfortable, but went along with it for the family and me. I received the keys to the house, the deed, the accounts, everything they tried to keep. The court issued a deadline. They had to move out. But what no one told me was what to do once I stepped back into that house. Alone. The house looked exactly the same. White shutters, trimmed hedges, a welcome mat so worn you could barely read the word anymore. But standing at the door with the keys in my hand, it didn't feel like coming home. It felt like trespassing on a life that had been stolen and barely returned. Daniel stayed by the car, giving me space. I wasn't ready to let him inside yet, not until I'd seen it for myself. I unlocked the door. The click echoed like a shot. Inside, the silence was heavy, not peaceful, not calm. The kind of silence that hovers when truth has been avoided too long. They had already moved out, court ordered. No drama, no confrontation, just absence. But their presence still lingered, not in people, but in the perfection. Everything was too neat, too intentional. Cushions aligned, dishes stacked. Fridge empty, except for baking soda and a half-open box of foil. They had cleaned everything but the air. I walked slowly to the living room. Grandpa's old rocking chair had been replaced by a slick gray armchair. The carpet was new. The scent of lemon polish coated the air like a mask. They had erased him, but only almost, because when I opened the bottom drawer of the old desk, beneath tax folders and empty envelopes, I found his pen, the silver one. The one with the scratch across the cap from when I knocked it off the table at age 12 and cried like I'd broken a bone. He had laughed, ruffled my hair, and said, "Things wear out. That's how you know they were loved." I sat on the floor, holding the pen. I cried for the first time since I found out he was gone. Not the polite tears I'd been taught to hold in at family dinners. Real, breathless, rib-crushing sobs. For the years I lost. For the last 3 birthdays I spent wondering if he was too tired to talk. I cried for the girl who left this house at 18, thinking she wasn't worth staying in touch with. And then I stopped. I stood up and went into the kitchen. There, by the window, stood his old wooden stool, the only thing they hadn't removed, probably to beat up to sell. I sat on it, facing the backyard. The garden beds were still there, empty now. But I remembered the tomatoes, the herbs, the way he used to flick the basil leaves and say, "Freshness has a sound." Behind me, I heard the door open. Daniel. He stepped inside carefully, like the house might collapse under his feet. When he saw me by the window, he didn't say anything at first, just watched. "They tried to turn it into a museum," I said, "a staged version of what it used to be." "But they couldn't erase him," he replied. "No," I said, "they couldn't." I reached under the sink. The toolbox was still there, hidden behind cleaning sprays and rusted brackets. Under the hammers and tape rolls, I found a small folded envelope. My name was on it, in his handwriting. Inside, a photograph. It was me at 5 years old, sitting in his lap, holding a wooden airplane he'd made. I had completely forgotten that moment, but there it was, a memory captured before anyone had a chance to distort it. Behind the photo, a note: "You were always my favorite story. Tell yours. Love." I stared at the words for a long time. Then I stood up and walked into the guest bedroom, the one they'd given me when I was little, with the faded lavender curtains and the creaky floorboard near the dresser. Everything had been changed: new sheets, modern decor, the smell of someone else's perfume still clinging to the pillowcases. But I pulled the curtain back and noticed something they hadn't found. Taped behind the windowsill, barely visible through dust and time, was a folded slip of paper. "If you ever need to find me, start where the robins used to nest." The robins, the old oak tree. I ran out the back door, Daniel close behind. We reached the tree at the far end of the yard, the one where he'd built a birdhouse with me the summer before high school. He'd carved our initials into the base, EC plus HW. The birdhouse was gone, but the base was still there. Carved into the wood, almost invisible from years of weather, was a shallow notch. I dug into it with my fingernails until something clicked loose. A key, old brass, cold to the touch. Daniel looked at me. "That's not a house key." "No," I said. "It's not." It was a different kind of door, but what it opened I had no idea. Not yet. I turned the key over in my hand again and again, hoping it would speak. It didn't look like a safe key, not a house key. Definitely not for a car. I recognized the etching. Grandpa used to mark his tools that way. W4 Whitaker. Daniel watched me as I stood at the kitchen counter, lost in thought. "So ... any idea what it opens?" I looked up. "Yeah, I think I do." Grandpa owned a workshop, a small, detached building at the edge of the property line, half swallowed by ivy. It was where he built birdhouses, repaired broken radios, and taught me how to use sandpaper. I hadn't been inside it in years. At some point, the family started locking it up. "Too dusty," Caroline once said. Nothing useful in there, but that had never stopped Grandpa before. Daniel followed me down the overgrown path. The wooden door was warped, paint flaking in thick chips. A rusted padlock hung from the latch. I inserted the key. It turned with a satisfying click. The door creaked open, groaning like it hadn't been opened in a decade. Light streamed through a cracked window, catching on particles of dust that floated like ghosts in the air. The workbench was covered with old tools, perfectly aligned. And on the far wall, a tall cabinet with a combination lock. Daniel closed the door behind us. I stepped closer to the cabinet and paused. The dial was already turned to 0. Taped beside it was a sticky note, yellowed with age. 1963, your birth year, my favorite number, and the date we built the first birdhouse. It was a puzzle only I could solve. I thought hard. Grandpa was born in 1933, my birth year, 1992, his favorite number, easy 7. It was on every clock in his house, and the date we built the first birdhouse, 19927, 612. Click, the cabinet door swung open. Inside were files, dozens of them, some in labeled folders, but at the very back of the cabinet, in a small metal box, I found what mattered most. A will, not the one the lawyer had shown me. This one was dated 2 years earlier, still valid, still binding, and attached to it 3 letters. One for me, one for Caroline, one for Monica. I opened mine first. "Emily, if you found this, then the others tried to keep it from you." I hoped I was wrong. You were always the one who asked the right questions. You saw through people faster than I ever could. That's why I chose you. I trusted your silence when you had to stay quiet, and your voice when you chose to speak. They resented that, but you never owed them anything. Everything I built was meant for someone who would protect it, not just enjoy it. That someone was always you. I hope this key didn't come too late. Love, Harold. I stood frozen. Daniel stepped beside me and took the letter gently from my hand. They knew, I said, voice barely audible. They all knew. Caroline had watched me grieve from another continent, never saying a word. Monica had posted birthday tributes online, pretending Grandpa was resting peacefully, and Leo he'd been paid to play a part in a lie so bold it rewrote 3 years of reality. All because of this, the will, and what was left to me. This changes everything, Daniel said. It explains everything, I corrected. We brought the files back into the house. I scanned them slowly. Deeds, trust, transfers. Records of Harold transferring money into my college account without my parents' knowledge. There were notes in his handwriting on several of the pages. She doesn't know this, but I'm proud of how she handled the scholarship rejection. She applied again, without telling anyone. That's grit. She cried in the car when she didn't win that science award, but she held her head high the next day. That's courage. Caroline said she wouldn't last a year in London. I knew better. Every word was another stitch in a wound I didn't know I had. For years, I'd believed I was forgotten, but I had never been. They had just stolen the proof. Daniel reached for the letter addressed to Caroline. Do you want to open it? I looked at the envelope. He smiled faintly. You know this isn't over yet. I nodded. I know. Because while the legal side was winding down, the emotional wreckage was just beginning. And something in me said they wouldn't go quietly. Especially not now that I had the one thing they couldn't fake. The truth. The house belonged to me now. The paperwork was signed, the deed filed. The keys in my hand didn't just open doors, they closed a chapter that no one else had dared to end. They left without a word. No final outburst, no handwritten apology, just silence, the kind that isn't peaceful, but calculated. Monica didn't text, Caroline didn't call. My father, as always, stayed somewhere in the background's island, complicit, comfortable in the role of passive shadow. Only one thing remained behind. A note on the kitchen counter, folded neatly next to a chipped coffee mug I remembered from childhood. You always were good at taking what you didn't earn. Mom, I didn't hesitate. I lit a match, watched the paper curl, blacken, and turn to ash in the sink. That first night alone, I didn't unpack. I didn't cook. I didn't even turn on the lights. I walked barefoot through the halls, letting the creaks and groans of the house guide me like an old song I didn't realize I remembered. I ended up in the den. It still smelled like him. Not just wood polish and cedar shavings, but something harder to name. Presence. Weight. Warmth that lingered in the corners even after the man who made it was gone. I sat down in the only chair that still felt right his. It was tucked under the window, leather cracked, one armrest slightly lower than the other. No one had moved it, because no one had dared. They'd replaced everything else. But that chair had remained. Because deep down, even liars have lines they won't cross. I reached into the side pocket. Inside was a candy wrapper, peppermint, his favorite. It made me smile painfully. I leaned back and let the silence wash over me. For the first time, it didn't feel threatening. It felt earned. Outside, the wind moved through the oak trees, rattling the old birdhouse. A robin landed on the edge for a moment, then flew off. I thought about calling Daniel. He had returned to the hotel for the night, giving me time to settle in. But I didn't pick up the phone. I needed to be alone with what was left. Because it wasn't just a house. It was a graveyard of every version of myself I had once tried to bury. The daughter who was never enough. The sister who lived in the margins. The girl who believed silence meant shame. But Harold Whittaker had known better. He had seen through the performance, the favoritism, the softness they saved for Monica, and the sharp edges they reserved for me. He left me his legacy, not out of pity, but out of certainty. He knew what they would do, and he trusted me to stand anyway. That trust was heavier than any inheritance. And yet, I looked around the room. imagining him sitting across from me, tea in hand, smile crooked, voice rough. "So, you made it." "I did," I whispered to no one. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. An unknown number, no voicemail, no follow-up. I turned the screen face down. I didn't need more explanations. I didn't need more excuses. Let them be ghosts in the hallways they no longer owned. Let them whisper about betrayal and brokenness. Let them wonder if I'd ever come after them. I wouldn't. They had already lost the only thing that mattered me. Later that week, I flew back to London. I didn't sell the house. I didn't renovate it either. I left it standing as it was, a monument to truth, to resilience, to a man who saw what others chose to ignore. I come back twice a year, once in June when the tomatoes start to bloom in the garden, and once in December when the wind carries the scent of cedar through the air. Each time I sit in that same chair, the last one they never dared to touch, and every time I sit there, I ask the same question that I know will never have an answer. If they hadn't lied, would I have ever come home at all?